Okay, everyone, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ana Cicolini. I'm from the King's Alumni Relations teams. The Alumni Office works to engage and partner with our global community of alumni. We offer you a range of benefits, events online, in person, and in your local community, as well as opportunities to volunteer your time. If you would like to get in touch, you can see the details in our screen. Every academic year, we live stream this webinar series featuring our King's experts to offer you the chance to hear directly from our researchers and practitioners on some of the most important issues of our time. Today, I would like to invite you to imagine a world where smart miniature robots allow surgeons to safely reach once unreachable parts of the human body, or where medical imaging technologies are now not only enabling us to see the living brain or the beating heart, but also reveal what's happening within and between our cells in real time as we diagnose and treat, or where computers can design life-changing new drugs in seconds. Our King's experts here today are turning these possibilities into reality. With advancements in AI, quantum, and microtechnology, they are transforming healthcare and engineering better health. In the first part of this webinar, we will hear from our stellar panel. Before opening the floor to questions, please do submit any questions via the Q&A function. To conclude, we will be returning to our panel for some final thoughts, and we will also be live streaming and recording this event to audiences on YouTube channel and in recording here on Zoom around the world. So whether you're watching live or watching the recording, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Without further delay, I'm delighted to hand over to our chair of the day, Professor Rachel Biren. She is the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Natural, Mathematical, and Engineering Sciences. And she will be introducing herself and our panelists and starts tonight's second King's Expert Series of this academic year. Professor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. And it's super to hear so many of our wonderful alumni joining us this evening. So I think I will start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves, all of whom are academics at King's undertaking groundbreaking research to develop technology for good. Let me start with Dr. Georges Cardozo. He is a reader in artificial medical intelligence. George, tell us about yourself.
Super. Thanks so much, Rachel, for the kind introduction. So I'm George. I'm a reader at King's, doing mostly research in fundamental AI applied to healthcare. And I'm also the CTO of something called the London AI Center, which is a consortium of hospitals and universities across London and southeast of England that have been trying to build platforms to enable AI at scale that improves the healthcare of our patients. So my research team does research in fundamental AI models, things similar to what you've seen in models such as ChatGPT, but applies them to healthcare to improve our ability to diagnose and prognose patients. The same technologies can then be deployed into the clinical environment by using some of the platforms we have developed as part of the AI Center. So, for example, my team has worked on algorithms, developed those algorithms, tested if they work in patients to improve, for example, the diagnosis of patients with stroke, and has gone through the process of making the same algorithms available to care for patients.
Thank you, and we'll hear more once we've introduced the other panelists. And if you do have questions, if you're wanting to ask questions to the panelists, you can pop them in the Q&A and we'll answer those later. So let's move on to Mohammed Musava, who's a professor of software engineering and a co-director of the King's Quantum Center. Please introduce yourself, Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you very much, everyone, for being here. My name is Mohammed Musavi, and I'm co-director of King's Quantum and professor of software engineering at the Department of Informatics. My area of expertise is in testing, validation, and verification. How do we make sure that software, which is becoming very critical in many applications, including healthcare, is doing the right job and is delivering on the promises and the requirements that was posed for it. We look at various applications, but for the purpose of tonight, I'm going to talk about our ongoing research on quality assurance of quantum algorithms, which are a new paradigm in computing, but it's also being applied to very exciting applications in healthcare as well. So we are looking at quality assuring quantum programs in particular, and making sure that they can produce accurate results even in the presence of noise, which is characteristic of current quantum architectures.
Thank you, Mohammed. And now moving on to Anne van Hoestberg, who's a professor of active implantable devices. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rachel. So my name is Anne van Hoestberg. I'm a professor of active implant technology here at King's in the School of Biomedical Engineering and Imaging Science. I'm also the director of MAISY, which is a facility unique in Europe that is dedicated to the manufacture of active implants and surgical instruments in a controlled environment, which enables researchers to take the output of their research and have a device produced with the sort of quality control that is required by our regulators to make sure that when we move to testing something in a human, it is safe and reliable. So we have this unique facility as part of the London Institute of Healthcare Engineering, which enables us to rapidly move from early stage research to first in human test and development. And that also enables the output of my research, which are specifically technologies to make smaller devices, and miniaturization is really important, as well as very long reliability. When we consider humans are going to live 100 years, we don't want them, if they benefit from an implant early on in their life, to having to stop using it at some point throughout their long life. So we're both looking at small devices and a highly reliable device.
Thanks, Anne. And our final panelist that we have this evening is Christos Bergeles, and he's a professor of surgical robotics. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rachel. Pleasure to be here in this panel. I'm Christos Bergeles, Professor of Surgical Robotics at the School of Biomedical Engineering and Imaging Sciences of King's. My research focuses on developing and bringing to clinical practice robotic systems that enhance the capabilities of surgeons and the capabilities of interventionalists. Specifically, we create robots that allow these practitioners to achieve what was previously considered impossible, reaching deep inside the body, traversing anatomy that is fragile and tortuous, minimizing harm, and achieving sustained delivery of drugs and therapies and so on. The key characteristic of our robots is that they have what is called physical intelligence, so morphologies that allows them to adapt and navigate the human body with limited external input, but also artificial intelligence that leverages a plurality of sensors like force sensors or imaging or sort of like in situ characterization of the tissue to understand what is the next best course of action for the robot and the surgical intervention. Our emphasis at this moment is the delivery of regenerative therapies, predominantly at the back of the eye, the retina, to help people see, and to the brain, where we try to reverse cognitive function decline.
So as you see, we've got an amazing range of speakers here this evening. I'm going to ask each of the panelists a question to follow in from their introductions, and then I'll be turning to you, to the Q&A, which I know questions are coming in, and we'll see how many of the questions we can get through. I know you've got many questions coming in, and our panelists have a wealth of interesting expertise to share with you. So let me start with George. You've been talking about AI in a range of the medical care and hospitals. Can you tell us a little bit about what your reflections are about what the role of patients and doctors are in the decision making? I think sometimes we can be a little fearful of AI taking over, but where do you see AI working with the patients and doctors so that AI can aid in helping making decisions?
No, I think that's a really brilliant question. And the reason that I say that is I don't think it's any different than many of the things that have happened to the NHS in the past 20 years. So the NHS has been built on what is called evidence-based medicine for the past forever, is accepted. So we collect evidence about what works, what doesn't work, and we make decisions on what's best for patients. And those get converted into guidelines, what is called the NICE guidelines. And that's what we use currently to treat patients. Because it's evidence-driven, it's quite rare that patients go against what the evidence says is best for them, but it's ultimately always the decision of the patient and the physician that is treating them as to what is best for them. That's why in the NHS, you always have the right to say no. You have the right to choose how you're treated. You have the right to choose where you're going to be treated and by whom. And I don't think AI is going to change that. But AI is nothing more than the natural evolution of evidence-based medicine, where we are using evidence, but rather than applying that evidence at the level of the group, we're applying that evidence at the level of the individual patient. So we're tailoring the evidence for you as a unique human being that is being treated. But ultimately, the decision is going to be made by patients and their carers, and it's going to be ultimately up to them to decide to trust or not trust what the evidence says about them. But again, with early glimpses and with some of the models we're starting to see, we do see a future where these technologies are just going to become incredibly useful. They're going to become very valuable for patients. They're going to allow us to actually provide care in a way that is equitable and that is actually caring for patients properly. So I do doubt that in the future, we're going to see many situations where patients and clinicians will go against what the evidence is provided. But it's going to be a more symbiotic relationship than someone might argue for.
I'm going to follow up just an extra little question there. So in terms of, say, developing a treatment plan or how patients and physicians can identify, what the best course would be, would there be a role of AI in there to help with that decision making?
Of course. The AI center for which I'm the CTO for is called AI Center for Value-Based Healthcare. And the aim of value-based healthcare is to look at the full patient pathway and figuring out what's best for the patient in a way that maximizes outcomes or things that matter to the patient while at the same time minimizing costs. And for example, there was a clear study that we made a few years ago looking at pacemakers. And we were able to demonstrate that the extra cost of implanting one of the most expensive pacemakers in patients would actually reduce the amount of time patients would have to come back, complications as secondary, for example, infection caused by those pacemakers. So we were able to show using AI that the optimal pathway was actually to implant a better device from day one. And that was actually resulting in better outcome for patients and less cost to the NHS. So it's super important that we use these technologies holistically and that we do look at the full patient journey so that we can really do what matters.
Thank you. So thinking a bit more about kind of patients and the surgeons and the physicians, Christos, in the area of surgical robotics, I wonder if we reflect on more generally history of technological advancement, sometimes we might be a bit fearful that people are being replaced by machines. So if we're thinking about surgical robotics, how does this work, this partnership between patient, surgeon, surgical robots, so that we get better outcomes for patients?
It's a very good question, Rachel, and indeed, always when automation comes in the picture, there are fears, and rightfully so, about lost jobs and so on. And the question here would be, how do we maximize the positive impact of such technologies while reducing any sort of negative footprint that it might have? And the way that we and most of the colleagues internationally see surgical robotics is as an additional actor in the operating room. So it is highly unlikely that we will see surgical robots completely overtaking, because they would always, at least in the foreseeable future, lack the ability and the cognitive ability that comes from years of experience. So they would come in and perhaps undertake some of the more mundane tasks. That is one point of view. As for example, if you have a car that has a different levels of autonomy, one of the mundane tasks is cruise control. Right, but we use it because it just takes this extra layer of thought process from our hands, and then you could see them as intervening when something bad is about to happen. So not taking over control, not always, but only when the sensors say, "Look, stop," because something bad will happen. And the prime example is the ABS in our car, right? So the ABS doesn't randomly break, but only when you have a snow or you're about to skid. And then, everybody accepts it. So similarly, surgical robot could say you are about to cut a vein, stop. And you could override it, or you could take a second step and think. So there would be more this synergistic relationship between the operating clinicians, and conversely, you could see a robot as assisting a scrub nurse, or taking the role of an assistant that could then be doing something else that's more meaningful. So complete substitution, I feel it is out of the question, definitely in the foreseeable future. And so increasingly, this is where surgical robots will be the embodiment of an artificial intelligence that goes and supplements the capabilities of the surgeons in terms of dexterity, and the AI comes in terms of cognitive performance.
That's great. And I wonder, say, just a cheeky follow-up there. You mentioned in your introduction the particular interest in the work with the retina and the eye. So in that case, how does the robot work with the surgeon for that particular example?
So these particular examples of regenerative therapies, they are very close to my heart and my interest, because most of these cognitive declines come with the functionality of the cells within the body not keeping up to what it should. And so in order to recover the lost functionality, you need to go and replace the tissue or the cells that have been damaged. And for this, you need to physically intervene. So it means you need to go in. And in order to go in, you need to go in the human body and operate at the cellular level, because that's what you need to replace. So a human hand has a hand tremor that's on the order of the human hair. And that's for like one of the microsurgeons, which are the most skilled surgeons in terms of like hand tremor and so on. And so if you want to operate at the cellular level over prolonged periods of time, like to do a sustained delivery, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, it's not possible to be done. And that's where the robot comes in. The robot is not going to take the decision on what to do, but it would offer what we call the suprahuman dexterity, so that the operator could achieve what they could previously not.
Amazing. Thanks, Christos, for that. Let's move on to Anne now. As you mentioned, your group is really at the cutting edge of developing really small medical devices. Can you tell us why is size so important? What new devices do you see on the horizon by really going miniature?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in relation to what topics have already been approached, we've talked about pacemaker, and if you think about the size of a pacemaker at the moment, it's roughly about wrong way around. It's about the size of my fingers as you see them. So if you look at your hand, it's about half of your finger hand. And this size is perfectly fine for a pacemaker. It's a great product that's been used. And as we hear, it's still being improved, although it's been around for a while. But if you think about what Christos was talking about and the eye is so small. If you try to place a visual prosthesis, so think about treating people who are suffering from loss of sight, just the way we can at the moment use cochlear implants to help people who have lost hearing, we could have an interface with the eye. But if you think about the size of, again, my pacemaker size in front of my eye, you're trying to put on the eye or around the back of the eye in an area that's really difficult to access, as Christos was saying, something that if it's not made very, very small, will never interface properly. So we're talking reducing by a factor 10 to 100 the size of current devices, whilst also enabling us to have many more connections. By connections, I mean that if you remember, those of you might remember the very early days of computer gaming, when you had big square pixels. And already on your screen in those days, you had several hundred pixels, nothing like the quality that we can see at the moment. Now, how many pixels do you need to see? How many of these connections would you want around the back of your, maybe, smaller than a 2p coin or something like that? How many connections do you need to be able to see well? So that's why miniaturization is so important. And in answer to some of the questions that have been online about what future technologies can we expect from active implantable medical devices, well, certainly visual prostheses are already undergoing first-in-human trials. So this is one of the soon-to-be new technology that we're going to see.
Brilliant. I'm just thinking about what Christos was answering in terms of his surgical robots being able to do things that the human hand can't and deliver. Do you ever kind of collaborate and work with the surgical robotics to actually deliver some of these implantable devices? Is there some opportunities there of collaboration?
We have a lot of shared supervision of students and many discussions. We're on the same floor. We're only just across the floor from each other. And there's a lot of cross-fertilization of ideas as well, where identifying a problem in one technology, or actually identifying a solution or a technology used by one group, can just feed into something. And that's true to all of us, not just the four of us on this panel. When we hear about somebody else's progress, we think, I can now integrate this into my flow, my processes. We're very multidisciplinary, and so cross sharing of ideas is really important.
Great. I think we'll probably hear some more of that later. But for now, I'd like to move to Mohammed. We've not heard anything yet about quantum, and you're very much an expert here. So it seems to me that quantum tech is very much moving from the world of sci-fi to quite practical applications. And perhaps you could tell us a little about some of the applications of quantum tech and quantum computing in particular, where we see applications appearing in healthcare. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So quantum technology is quite broad. It covers many different types of technologies that build upon quantum mechanics, and they range over things like quantum sensors, which are currently being used even in commercial applications for things like brain imaging. So there are companies in the UK that use quantum technology for brain imaging. Then another type of quantum technology that has been commercialized is quantum communication. So if you look at things like quantum key distribution, we have commercial devices that ensure that communication lines are secure using quantum mechanical principles like quantum key distribution. And that's another type of very mature commercial technology, which is very strong also in the UK. So that's another area. But the third area that you asked, and is also much closer to my area of research, is quantum computing. Quantum computing used to be a very theoretical branch of computer science where people kind of hypothetically thought of quantum computers and then came up with algorithms. But in the past 2 decades, so starting from 2005 onwards, we see an increase in the compute power of quantum computers to the extent that every couple of years we see a doubling of the quantum power, compute power of those computers in terms of the number of qubits. Qubits are quantum kind of counterparts to bits as we have in computers. So every couple of years, we see a doubling in the number of qubits available on quantum computers. In 2005, 2007, 8, the number of qubits we had at our disposal to compute were bound by, say, 10 in that order of magnitude. Now we can easily get access online to computers with more than 100 qubits available to us to do our research. So availability of those cloud-based quantum computers is definitely a big resource. And that has enabled new applications, including healthcare. So people have been using at King's quantum algorithms for drug discovery, for studying properties of material, for looking at how different types of molecules, medical molecules, permeate through different membranes, for example, brain membranes, and interact with different functionalities of the cellular pathways in brain and stuff like that. So because of the availability of that compute power, we see also a proliferation of these type of applications in healthcare in particular.
Wonderful. I'm starting to glance through some of the questions that are coming in from the Q&A. So I think the panelists, thank you so much for that first round of questions. I think you've all given the audience plenty to ask. So I'm going to pick up some of those questions from the audience now. There's quite a few questions coming in thinking a bit more about the ethical implications of AI and other technologies. And I think maybe we could take a couple of those first. So one question which has come in is about asking whether AI and medical protocols, which have kind of got a strong underpinning with algorithms, can have a risk of reducing our ability to think critically in medicine and ultimately damage patient care, particularly when there's situations with multimorbidity. So, George, I think when you've been thinking about that overall patient outcomes and integrating AI and algorithms into that, maybe you could pick that question up to start with.
No, absolutely. I think that's an incredibly important question. And I would argue that the same argument was made probably when calculators were invented, that they would make the brain dull and make people stop thinking. The reality is that the world has evolved, science has evolved dramatically, and it's very hard for a single clinician to hold every single piece of information in their mind. And the amount of data that is being collected about our patients as part of their care process is getting increasingly complex. For example, currently, the best practice you can have for treating complex disorders, such as many forms of cancer, is for you to have something like a multidisciplinary team meeting, a group of clinicians that come together to discuss a case for sometimes hours to make the best decision for the patient. That recognizes that they don't have all the information in their own brains. They need to collaborate with others to be able to get the best output. There's no reason why this collaboration couldn't happen with algorithms, primarily now that language models are becoming increasingly apt. This is not to say that that technology exists now or that it has been validated to that degree, but you can have algorithms interacting with humans in a very similar way that humans interact with one another. And I would actually argue that the amount of patients that the clinician sees throughout their lives is actually quite small compared to an algorithm can see. So I would suspect that algorithms will be really good at making the NHS much more equitable from the point of view of patients that come from different ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, but also patients that have complex multimorbidity situations where maybe there's a rare case that has happened in a specific hospital somewhere, and that case can now be used to inform the treatment of every single patient in the UK. So that transformation is going to be incredible, but it needs to be done in a way that is safe and in a way that fulfills all the regulatory requirements that already exist. And I think it's incredibly important that we also appreciate that healthcare AI is very different from general purpose AI, in the sense that the regulatory landscape has existed for many years, actually for decades, is very well developed. The degree of evidence necessary to be able to have these technologies existing in the hospital is really immense. So it's not like I can just go into the hospital and install ChatGPT and have a go at it. That's just not how it works. There's an excruciatingly long process to go through. So if you do see these technologies being used as part of your care, it's because they work, or at least it's because there is sufficient evidence to support that they work well enough.
I think I'm going to just stay with you a little bit longer, George, because you've started to touch on this aspect of regulation and policy. Now, you've mentioned that tightly regulated environment that is in the NHS and with things like the NICE guidelines. But do you think that current regulation and policy surrounding AI, surrounding how surgical robots are used, how is it keeping pace with developments? I'll ask you, but I think I might invite other panelists if they want to comment a little bit more about this area of regulation and policy. When you've got a fast-moving area, how can we make sure that the regulations and policies are fit for purpose when it's rapidly changing the technologies?
Yeah, so I'm sure that Anne and Chris and others will have a lot to say here, but we are seeing an increasing detachment between the pace of technological development and regulations. And every country is now trying to innovate on the regulatory landscape itself to be able to create faster iteration cycles, easier ways to collect evidence, but also make sure that we can prioritize technologies that can have a tremendous impact to patients. But as with every single technology, every time technology curve goes up, the legal curve tries to catch up, but is also always going to pin it down. So I think it's going to be very important that we recognize that that technology curve will continue going up. But even if we were to cease to do new developments from a technical point of view, let's say in AI and healthcare, the next 10, 15 years, we will still see a tremendous transformation in healthcare, even with today's technology, just because we would be slowly unlocking all of these different barriers that currently exist, from legal to regulatory to integration to compatibility to translation. All of these things will slowly be fixed. And as we do so, technology that exists today will then finally be used in patients.
Great. Anne, do you want to comment at all on that sort of regulation and policy? Would you like to comment as well?
Yes, certainly. We can say first that as part of the London Institute of Healthcare Engineering, we have regulatory expertise in-house. So we have experts who work with the MHRA or who understand the FDA. So for context, the FDA is the regulator in the US, the MHRA is the regulator in the UK, and then the EU has a different regulation that we have broken up. So they progress their regulation, and in the UK we stayed to the 2002 regulation, which will soon be updated. So in that context, we have regulatory expertise that enables a researcher to achieve reach within a range of markets. It's really important to understand that first and foremost, the regulator's priority is the safety of users of the technology. So their incentives aren't financials, their incentives are always safety. And the challenge we have is that innovation goes fast, but innovation that is verified and validated, and this applies also, as Mohammed was saying, it applies in computing as well as in hardware. The verification and the validation of technology is what is really challenging that can tend to be seen as inhibiting the race of technological progress. You can develop something quickly, but the path into demonstrating that you meet regulatory requirements is challenging. It is further challenging for innovation. Regulators like to go by standards that have international approval. This is a way to test and demonstrate the safety of X or Y technology. If you have an innovation, this technology hasn't yet been considered by these international standards panels, and therefore the process of demonstrating this first needs to be developed. There must be consensus around it. The regulators must be convinced that this process of demonstration of the safety and of the reliability of the product is acceptable. So it puts delays. There's a question I'd like to answer by Tim Malone that asks about whether manufacturers have an incentive in selling many more devices. And I think we recognize, I recognize the article you're relating to, which is about a 10-year-old article about incentives in specifically in pacemaker batteries. You may be glad to know, Tim, that the UK is leading the development of innovation in battery technology that will enable very small batteries to be made, and they are specifically targeting a range of areas, including implantable medical devices. Having said that, I think that we have to realize that the cost to a manufacturer of changing their technology in terms of revalidating their products, especially active implants, which to demonstrate the safety thereof, if you are going to implant something in a person for 50 years, your tests are significant. And the cost to that is actually causing a lot of companies to go under. They can't sustain the cost of revalidation, so they keep their device going as long as they can, and then the product ceases to be available because the manufacturer cannot afford the cost of innovation. So we have to be really careful here. There are innovations, but there are also reasons why established technologies, the cost-benefit analysis is always dominant in this market. And it probably would be too challenging to replace batteries in existing systems with more advanced battery technology. But fear not, they are coming. We're seeing real progress in battery technology, in implantable battery technology. I don't know, Christos, if you wanted to add anything on the role of regulation.
No, I mean, I agree with what both of you and George said. And I mean, on one hand, it could be seen as inhibiting innovation. On the other hand, I mean, if I am a patient, I would have liked these inhibitions to be in place so that I know that the technology is safe and validated. And I do think that in the past there were easier ways to do experiments, but that doesn't mean that it was the correct way to do things. And the other thing is, and we see this in companies, and you see this in people that like start one company after the other. It's also the experience that you get, right? So once you've been through the journey of understanding what the regulatory pathway is, then it is much better to follow it from the beginning. And this is what we're trying to do at King's: educate ourselves, educate our students and our researchers. This is the pathway, this is the risk analysis. Like, you can consider it from day one. And I think this will make us be able to innovate and bring to clinic technologies quicker, rather than just stay with proof of concepts that would never be validated in a realistic setting.
That's great, a really great insight. And I think having, recognizing that there is that expertise and there is that experience of taking fundamental research all the way through to patient outcomes and through that regulatory pathway is a real strength that we have. I'm going to shift slightly to thinking a little bit more about that patient outcome and the experience that patients have and that kind of technology for good. Staying with you for a moment, Christos, can you tell us a little bit more of a example breakthrough in the surgical robotics at King's that has really improved patient outcomes? It would be great to hear a little bit more, once it's gone through all that regulation and we've actually got some benefit to patients in the clinic.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. Okay, so I mean, to be fair, King's is at this unique place where we have the capability of evaluating and spearheading innovation in terms of its use in clinic. For example, we have, Prakhar Dasgupta. He's one of the pioneers of using surgical robotics in urology. I believe it might have been the first, let's say, evaluation of the Da Vinci surgical robot, and really paved the way in using this technology. We have had surgical robotics companies that focus more on the planning stage, or not so much on the robot, but how do you pre-plan the surgery? Spin outs that have been acquired, and on the side of creating surgical robots, there is flexible colonoscopy, soft colonoscopy, now I think approaching first in human evaluation, developed under a quality management system. Now there is a company that has licensed the technology. So it is a long process and a long pipeline, and definitely within the London Institute of Healthcare Engineering, there are, if I'm not wrong, 4 surgical robotics technologies that are being accelerated, myself having one of those companies in terms of regenerative therapy delivery. So watch this space. It's a long journey, especially with the regulations, as we were touching before, but a lot of exciting things have happened and will keep happening.
Turn to Anne for a little bit more about the active implantable medical devices. You've mentioned pacemakers. That's probably one of the most well-known one of those, but I think there's certainly a question interested to hear a bit more about current applications being developed, and also a sense of, how soon will patients, what's the sort of timescale? How soon will it be that patients can benefit from some of the new technologies that are on the horizon? It'd be great to hear a little bit more about what's happening now.
Yeah, we hear a little bit exciting potential, isn't it? And of course, for anybody who reads sci-fi or watches sci-fi, your dreams are probably filled with way more applications than most people can ever conceive. In practice, it takes anything between 20 and 30 years for innovation to reach first in patients. So this sort of implants that we're seeing making the news every now and again in the last few years, where a person's has an implant in their brain, which enables them to control a cursor on a computer or possibly type a few words. And there are several companies that have been innovating in that field. And the early innovation in that domain date back to the 1960s and 70s. That gives you an idea of timeline, this being one of the most complex type of application. So in terms of what already exists, there's a lot of technology that people don't think about at the moment that already exist and are really advanced. Deep brain stimulation is a good example. We already place brain implants chronically in the brain. This isn't something that's sci-fi. We're able to modify a person's experience of a traumatic disease by interacting with their brains with a surgically implanted device. So we already have fantastic devices that are out there that people don't think about, cochlear implants being another example. One area I'm really excited to see a lot of progress on are sensors. So we know that people who suffer from diabetes can benefit from implanted sensors. However, the sensors' lifetime are still very limited, and they require weekly or bi-weekly readjustments. So they still need to take a few pinpricks. In the future, in this area, we're going to see so many potential applications. I'm really excited by applications in oncology. If you are at high risk of cancer, or if you've had cancer and you are fortunate enough to be in remission, every time you have to do a test, you'll dread the worst. It's not possible to live with a fear of cancer and just say, absolutely never think about it. Everyone will tell you this is terrible. If we could make a small implant, and we will see this, small implants injected into the arm or in some inconspicuous area of a person, gently monitoring away, and this person knows that they're safe. They don't need to think about it, because here we are collecting data that knows when something changes. They'll know it as soon as it's the early stage of cancer, and that will be able to be picked up. Possibly the next generation of that will even manage to try to interact with the tumor growth and interfere with it from a point of view of the implant. But the early stage, the sensors will see it. Now, bear in mind, as I've said, we're talking 10, 20 years development plans here, not tomorrow, but it will come. Visual prosthesis will be out there one day. A lot of other applications of sensing. I could go on for a long time. I'm aware of the time, but we have so much potential with small applications.
Great. Thanks, Anne, for those examples. That sensing, I think, is really, really interesting. Thinking of microtechnologies, I'm going to go super small, and let's move on to the quantum technologies and be thinking a little bit more about those, because there's a few questions coming here. So there's a question about brain images and quantum computing for imaging, medical imaging sciences. So Mohammed, the question is, how do you use quantum mechanics to scan brain images, and how in depth would you be to see the brain? So what sort of resolution would you be able to see? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the role that quantum computers and quantum techniques play in healthcare imaging. That would be great.
So in particular, if you look at imaging and brain imaging, it's the quantum sensing part of quantum technology that is making most influence. And as I said in my introductory notes, quantum sensing is quite mature, and there are commercial products for brain imaging, for example, using principles of quantum mechanics. The idea is that, and it's a bit farther from my quantum computing research, but the basic idea is that instead of having sensors that act on classical principles, you have sensors that are very, very small and hence very, very precise. They can act on quantum mechanical principles. So basically a single atom, a single photon, for example, or a small number of photons can interact and find out whether a certain phenomenon is present or absent in an area that you are doing imaging. So it gives you far more precision than classical sensors because you are basically interacting with individual particles there. And it has very vast applications, not only in imaging, but also in things like gravity, for example, or in geolocation, for example. If you don't have access to GPS signal, for example, in London Underground, there has been a very recent project where you use quantum mechanical principles for locating, for example, trains in London Underground. So all those very precise sensing material have matured. But when we come to the computing side, which is closer to my area, we see lots of very interesting potentials in things like drug discovery, drug repurposing, because we are basically simulating phenomena that are at the quantum level, right? So you're looking at a certain molecule interacting with proteins, with different types of molecules in a cell, interacting with different pathways in a cell. And in order to model that in a classical setup, you need to do a lot of transformations, and very soon your computing problems becomes intractable because you are dealing with exponential number of variables that interact with each other. However, when you map that into a quantum computer, there is almost a one-to-one mapping between the phenomenon that you're simulating and the actual quantum physical computing phenomena that you're using to compute those phenomena, right? So for example, you're looking at how different molecules interact with each other, how different electrons interact with each other, and those you can map one-to-one almost into qubits of your quantum computer, because they are basically following the same principle. So every bit that you are modeling becomes a qubit in your quantum computer, and then you avoid that exponential blow up in the size of the modeling. So we expect the earliest payoffs of using quantum computing in simulating physical, chemical, biological phenomena that are inherently extremely difficult to model on a classical computer, and have a very straightforward mapping into a quantum computer. And we already see breakthroughs through that. We already see spin-offs also out of King's, people looking at, for example, neuropsychological medication, how it goes through different membranes, including brain membrane, and interacts with different cells. Those type of applications are likely to be the early adopters of quantum technology, and that's also the focus of King's Quantum as a research center.
Fabulous. So if I was trying to explain the question that was posed about using quantum mechanics to scan brain images, you're sort of, what the take home I'm getting from what you're saying is there's two areas of quantum that is really important. One, which perhaps connects with what Anne was saying in some sense about the importance of sensing. So these quantum level, quantum sensing really can get down to particles, and that can sense things that conventional mechanisms wouldn't be able to. And there's that approach in sensing. And there's the other aspect of quantum computing, which is an incredibly powerful computing technique, which enables us to model and simulate all sorts of really complex systems in the health environment, be that in drug discovery and others, looking at drugs passing through the brain and so forth. So there's sort of two aspects of where quantum can feed in. I could talk all evening about this, but I'm going to have to make sure we move through the questions.
Absolutely. No, your impression was absolutely
yeah.
correct, yes.
Good. We've got probably time for one or two more from the Q&A. So I'm just going to quickly scan through here. Let me go back to George, I think, a little bit more about the AI and some of the work on drug discovery, perhaps, feeding from what Mohammed's saying about using really complex computers. George, can you perhaps look at this question about AI streamlining the drug discovery process? And maybe while we're doing that, I can just bring in another question towards the interdisciplinary approach, because I'm expecting that question of drug discovery is going to require AI researchers, healthcare practitioners, engineers to work together in an interdisciplinary way. So maybe we can try and answer two of those questions at the same time. So drug discovery, interdisciplinary, your thoughts?
This is a 3-hour discussion, not a 3-minute.
You got 2 minutes.
Right. So first of all, AI really has a room to play pretty much at every single stage of the drug discovery pathway, from what is called phase 0, where we're trying to understand disease pathways and how diseases work so that we know what to do about them, to phase 1 and phase 2, where we are trying to test some very early molecules that have been, in many situations, designed by AI. And we can test those molecules either in patients, but we can also test them in silico using all classes of technology. The same kinds of AI models can then later be used in phase 2, phase 2Bs, phase 3s to be able to, for example, make trials more efficient, make sure we are selecting the right patients to be able to give them the right treatments, and that we are that we are tackling the problem of precision medicine at the level of the trial, so that our trials have a higher likelihood of success. Because if our trials are more successful, then the cost of developing drugs go down. And if the cost of developing drugs go down, the cost of actually delivering those drugs to patients also go down. And we can make pharma efficient again. The same thing can happen in what is called phase 4s or even phase 5s, depending on who you talk to, which is the post-market surveillance. So after a drug reaches market, how do we make sure that the drug is actually working on our patients? Because what is discovered in a randomized controlled trial setting is very different than what often happens in the real world, where patients might miss their appointments or might not adhere to medication and might forget to take their drugs and things like this, right? So AI really has a role to play across that continuum. It also has a role to play in how different specialities interoperate with one another, right? We need to make sure that clinicians work much more closely with engineers, much more closely with basic scientists, all the way from physics to chemistry, right? To make sure that all of those technologies are integrated. We know all the low-hanging fruits, the really easy drugs, have pretty much been developed. And we now need to go into a domain where we really need to think very thoroughly, and we need to combine all sorts of expertise to be able to develop technologies that will have an impact in our patients.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to have one final question to all of the panelists, and this is looking ahead, looking ahead to perhaps about the exciting opportunities for technology for good, but also looking ahead, and I think I'm feeling somewhat inspired by some of the questions that are coming through that we've not touched on, looking ahead to think about perhaps, how this technology for good can be provided to lower income countries, or how the technology for good can be incorporated into future design of hospitals. So it's really a chance for you to have some final thoughts and comments from each of the panelists in turn, looking ahead. So let me start with Mohammed. Your thoughts looking ahead.
Right. So I think it's a very exciting area where we see an interesting increase in the compute power of quantum, but also a very interesting integration of quantum and classical computing in ways that was not possible before. And that requires many disciplines come together. So I work very closely with chemists, with physicists, with people from pharmacology, in order to understand their problems and see how we could potentially map them into compute platforms. And that also holds in terms of collaboration with low-income countries and finding applications of these technologies where it's appropriate. I can imagine that there are types of quantum technology that are more suitable in terms of, say, quantum sensing, for example. You could find maybe more precise, cheaper sensing technology that can be developed for low-income countries. But I think in essence, what is very essential here is that this is inherently interdisciplinary. We need people to get together and try to translate different types of requirements into each other and try to understand each other's problems in order to come up with very efficient solutions there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mohammed. Christos, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic discussion item in terms of like democratizing technologies and so on. And what I would stress is I think we need to take a very careful view of this question, because what we are developing here is not fit for purpose for another perhaps another country that faces different needs and different priorities. So we need to work accordingly internationally with whoever is interested and understand what are the critical problems that every society is facing, and they are not the ones that we are addressing. So we might be looking into, reversing a blinding loss by age-related macular degeneration, which is the primary loss of sight in the UK. But in India, for example, it's diabetic retinopathy. In Nepal, it's a cataract. So I think we need to, it's not an easy answer. Yeah, we're going to make technology cost-effective, cheaper, blah, blah, but I mean, how do you source it from local materials? So I think it's a very interesting discussion, requires very careful thinking, engagement of the stakeholders, and definitely something we should be doing more and internationally engaging.
Thanks. Anne, your thoughts about the future and what it holds?
What a great answer from Christos, isn't it? How to follow up on that? I think several points are being actively developed here. Some of them are around the use of resource and then the idea of modular systems. So there's a lot of reasons why we should be moving away from single-use devices to reusable devices within a safe, of course, context. But designing for reuse means that we consider the product that has to be reused. And so we make a design that enables re-sterilization, that enables reprogramming if necessary. There are a lot of design changes that we can make that would permit longer life by reusing them. That's a first thing. There's also something else which Christos alluded to, which is the local resources and local knowledge. There's nothing preventing equal quality products to be manufactured locally where cost within an economy are different to cost in other economies. And this is, again, something that we're really looking into in terms of understanding the local economy, understanding the local cultures, to make sure that the products are designed and can be manufactured in different settings. This is actually one area where regulations can really help. The markets are really tightly controlled, so it's one of the only areas where we can make sure that a product that is marketed in one country is not available in another, permitting other low-cost resources local to another country to benefit that country. And so every country can benefit from equal, excellent quality technology at prices that fits their market. This is something that we're going to see, one of the rare clear benefits of regulation.
George, looking ahead, perhaps you want to comment a little bit more about the NHS of the future, hospitals of the future, but you're completely free to make your future comments, what you'll be interested and excited to comment on.
It's very hard to predict where the technology is going. And I think healthcare is always going to lag behind many other fields purely because of the regulatory landscape, but also because we're taking care of humans, right? We need to be incredibly sure of the things we do before we deploy them. But if I had one wish, and I think it's something that will be happening in the next 10 years, and I think it will take 10 years, not because the AI technology is not going to be there, but because everything else needs to be in place, the data, the integration, the legal components, the regulatory components, the governance components. But one thing that I think will be there in the next 10 years is this notion of value-based healthcare that I was describing before. And I do believe personally that this is the only way that we can make our NHS more sustainable. We know our current healthcare system wastes a lot of money and time by doing the wrong treatments to the wrong patients, putting people through unnecessary procedures, and many times not resulting in the outcomes that we want. And my hope is that digital health and AI, when put together, can help us much better understand the care we should be providing to each individual patient, be able to provide the evidence and the explanation as to why certain things are necessary or not, so that ultimately the patients will have control over what happens to them. But at the same time, so that the quality of care we are providing to patients in the UK is massively exceeds the current standard. And I do hope that AI is going to be the tool that is going to make that possible, because otherwise we will not have an NHS in 10 years if the costs continue rising at the rate that they are.
Thank you so much, George, and thank you all the panelists. I think as experts in this area, you've really put across both your expertise, but also your humility in the limitations of AI and quantum and micro devices, microtechnology, what it does in facing the challenges of healthcare. So thank you all so much. I found this session fascinating, and I'm sure many of our attendees have as well. Thank you.
Everyone. Thank you so much, everyone. We would like to say it's so interesting. Sorry if we couldn't answer all of your questions. We have around 62 or more, but thank you so much. I would like to say a huge thank you to our chair and the panel of experts for sharing their expertise, and to you for joining us today for such an engaging discussion. We always appreciate your feedback, and so please complete our quick survey via the QR code you can see on the screen right now. And also look out for our next King's Expert series that will be taking place in January 2025. And our experts will discuss global leadership in the 21st century. I think that's a great topic. And further details will be available in our website. Thank you again, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.